SGA, Jokic, as much as we love him, much as we love Jokic, like in terms of being in that super elite class, that is a elite conversation and a conversation to take very, very seriously. He needs to win multiple titles. That doesn't mean he's some scrub player. It doesn't mean, like you said, Matt, that he's probably not going to be the greatest big man who ever lived. But I think that pressure of the ghost of Michael Jordan, it's not just the 6 titles. It's not just him, the accolades that he had. It's just him as just a force, as an entity to pull the NBA from not really obscurity, but from a international league, and that goes for the other players with the Dream Team, but he was the face of that team. That's just really hard to compete, and that's almost an impossible bar for a lot of these players, and I just think they just got to go out and just play. And I don't think they need to worry about it. It's something that's impossible just to achieve, and it's to let people get in their heads to worry about achieving that overall marker there. I just think it's kind of a waste of time.
So, guys, I want to start with kind of something that is, I guess, downer news. There's no way around it. There have been player shutdowns, and unfortunately, this is tied to injuries. And I guess we'll just kind of list them all off real quick. Wemby was shut down for the season, I believe, and you guys please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a blood clot issue in the shoulder, eerily similar to issues that Chris Bosh was dealing with when he had to kind of early retire from the league, kind of medically retire from the league. So, of course, our thoughts go out to Wemby, and we hope that he is back and better than ever next season. Huge bummer to see this sort of sophomore exit imposed on him. Then we also have in Philadelphia, who we've discussed at full length, have had a rough season. I mean, maybe the roughest season of any team given where the expectations were. But Joel Embiid, I think the 76ers in part have made the decision to try and retain their draft pick. I'll let you guys expand on how much that may have to do with this, but Joel Embiid is out for the rest of the season. He's had concerns since the start of the season and leading up into the season, so they finally decided to shut him down for the rest of the season. And then Kyrie Irving, just as of yesterday, I believe, at the time of recording this podcast, tore his ACL. That's a huge bummer because we know the Mavericks are going through it right now, and this is just a horrible thing to happen because we well know this isn't just going to keep him out for this season, but likely a good chunk of next season as well, depending on that recovery timeline. Allan, I want to throw it to you first. You can pick any one of these situations. Just give me your thoughts on it and the impact to the team affected by it.
I'll touch on the JoJo news because there's something I've long wanted to kind of say in a public forum, and I kind of hinted at it on Twitter the other day, and that's that I don't know how you have a franchise like Philadelphia 76ers and have one of the worst medical staffs that
Oof.
I mean, how many players have they screwed up over and over again? Markelle Fultz, Ben Simmons, JoJo. I mean, who's on that staff? Is it RFK and Dr. Oz? That's all I can think of is who their medical staff is. I think it is strategic, Matt. I think you're spot on. They're tanking now. And I also want to just take this opportunity to welcome anybody who's, missing the Paul George podcast and joining us now. So all you Paul George podcast people, now that he's put down his podcast to concentrate on his basketball career, we're glad to have you here.
Yeah, seems like odd timing. I mean, maybe for other players that might have happened, before the season started, but hey, to each their own. It's a huge bummer what's happened in Philly. I don't know. All these situations are huge bummers. Obviously, goes without saying. You don't want to see teams playing short-staffed, and especially with top-level talent in the league. It hurts the NBA at large. You make some great points there about the medical staff, and you're right, connecting the dots to the past there. And I also wonder if Paul George will be on the podcast train soon. I mean, if they really shut things down and go for this tank, Paul George, though it's been an underwhelming season, he would probably be riding the bench a little more often. So we'll see what happens with that and keep posted. Justin, pick any of these scenarios you want to touch on, or Allan, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick. I can't wait to see the Paul George out podcasting injury report.
There we go. Hey, that draws more awareness to podcasters like us, so I'm all for it. Justin, feel free, take any scenario you want to touch on here real quick.
Yeah, I'll take the Mavericks into things. And first, before I give full credit to Allan, very, like you were saying, Matt, such unfortunate news about Kyrie. I mean, injuries are always killer. I just hate when athletes get hurt. It's just, I don't know, it's brutal. So very unfortunate. And also that pretty much, I think, spells the end for Anthony Davis as well. I mean, they're probably going to sit him for the rest of the season. And I think you got to wonder, and you brought this up, Allan, at first. I kind of dismissed it as like NBA conspiracy, but you brought it up. Our former guest, Dexter Henry, has brought it up. I've heard some other people bring this up. And it seems like this momentum of this team moving to Las Vegas has really picked up a lot of chatter among NBA circles. And I kind of thought about this with another former guest that we had, James Plowright, who covers the Charlotte Hornets, and they were the Charlotte Bobcats. And then, all that franchise shuffling with them going to New Orleans. I wonder if maybe a similar thing could happen here in terms of maybe Mark Cuban getting back involved. I just can't see Mark Cuban is sitting here and just letting the Mavericks just disappear and rot like this. Like, I can't. And I know he's like a minority owner, but I just can't. He's at these games now, and he's been a lot more publicly active in terms of kind of being shown on camera. And I think something's up in terms of the future of the Mavericks. Like you mentioned, we talked in our group chat, guys, and Allan brought this up of the Mavericks raising ticket prices. I mean, something's awry is definitely going on here. And I just feel with the NBA, I don't believe they're going to allow them just to move a team out of Dallas with Dallas having nothing. I just feel like they're going to have a replacement franchise there one way or another. So I think that's I don't know. The spider sense is tingling with this whole situation here. And I do believe in Allan's scenario that they're going to be moving the Mavericks franchise to Vegas, and they're going to be some kind of replacement team in Dallas. That's the only thing I see differently, is that I think Dallas will have a team. I just can't see Dallas having nothing. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, it's too big of a market to just totally move it out entirely. And I will say, to your point, Justin, when I saw the alert pop up on my phone that Kyrie had torn his ACL, I really had this moment where it's like, okay, I need to get on Google. Like, is this real? Like, did this really happen? This just seems so improbable with everything that has happened for the Mavericks over the last, really what, like 3 weeks? It's just insane. Allan, any thoughts on the Mavericks here?
Yeah, I mean, I Justin, I think you might be onto something. I don't know if Cuban will be involved. I guess it'll depend on how his presidential exploration committee goes. But he's definitely making himself more visible for many reasons, probably. Dallas can't be without a basketball team. They're the fifth largest city in the U.S. It may be the fifth largest city, but the sports market is even ranked higher than, say, like Houston, which is a notoriously kind of poor sports market. They will do something. Something will happen there, and I like your scenario, Justin.
Yeah, it's interesting because Cuban really doesn't hold many more cards other than that past success, the goodwill he's built with that community, which is, nothing small, nothing to scoff at. But to have anything happen, I mean, it would almost take, pulling Adam Silver strings maybe, and like having him force those owners to sell or something like that. But something to definitely keep a pulse on. And then, Justin, why don't you just give me a few lines? I mean, we're all in agreement the Wemby news is a huge bummer. We also got the news that Greg Popovich won't be returning to the sidelines as well. So Spurs, kind of forcibly throwing in the towel here, unfortunately. Any additional thoughts on this Spurs situation?
No, just echoing your sentiments. Just truly unfortunate. I saw the news on ESPN. It was just ruined my day. I think Wemby had a lot of momentum, especially this season. I felt like he was somewhat coming into his own, having that mentorship with Chris Paul, and just to see him suffer that is terrible. Hopefully he can recover. I mean, a blood clot is pretty serious. So I just hope the Spurs medical team is correct and he can be back next season.
Absolutely. Allan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping it's more of an Oscar Thompson situation than a Chris Bosh situation. So that's the hope.
100%. Moving right along, you know what? We've started with some negative news. We'll kind of keep going with it's a little bit more humorous, at least, than these season-ending injuries that we just mentioned. So at least there's that. But things continue to be a little bit spicy in Phoenix, I guess, is one way to put it. Maybe a little bit chilly, maybe a little bit cold is a better way to put it, given Coach Bud trying to grab Kevin Durant's arm the other night as he was walking by in a game during a break, and Kevin Durant, giving basically throwing Coach Bud's arm off of him and continuing to walk on his way forward. Guys, I've been around a long time. I won't lie to you. I've seen, LeBron James basically, shoulder block in wrestling terms, Coach Spo in a timeout break. What do you make of what's going on in Phoenix right now? We talked about a couple weeks ago that, really the Bradley Beal deal was the critical mistake that this team made in what they were trying to build. So we know where that's gone. Where do you see things right now, given, tempers flaring, emotions running, everyone making jokes and posting memes about KD's next team, being the Celtics or whatever? Allan, let's start with you here. What are your thoughts on Phoenix?
Well, I don't know. If I were a Phoenix fan, I'd be really happy with what happened because you mentioned the LeBron Spoelstra thing. If we're going by the past, then I think the Suns not only make the playoffs, but they make the finals again, only to lose to the Mavericks. So lock that in. That's my prediction.
Right on. Justin, how do you feel about it? I think if I remember right, because I was following the Heat pretty closely, I think the Heat were like 9-8 when the Spo thing happened. Like it was pretty early in the game of that super team coming together. I'm sorry, Justin, go ahead. Your thoughts on Phoenix?
I feel two sides of this. On one hand, like you guys were saying, this is competitive sports. Players get heated in a certain amount of times, but as we were talking about in our Kevin Durant discussion a couple of weeks ago, I mean, it's not a fluke that this guy, he's been traded for a majority of teams. It can't be an accident. And I think that's to be put on his attitude. As a player on the court, Kevin Durant is exceptional. So to me, seeing this, I think highlights why teams want to get rid of him. And if the Suns were, the top team in the West, I don't think we'd be discussing this right now. But they are struggling along with all their other issues, and I think this highlights a lot of what's been going wrong in Phoenix. Because certainly from a talent level, they should be performing way better than what's happening now, even though they got the win the other night.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds. There have been several times in the NBA. Even recently, like thinking of Russell Westbrook on the Lakers, for example, there are these situations where the analysts, everyone is saying like, I don't know how they get out of this. This is impossible. And then all of a sudden, like a trade is made, something is figured out, and things maybe not get better, but things work their way towards resolving. So I'm curious to see if we get something like that. But it seems like with the new rules around the salary cap and the aprons and things like that, it's a little more improbable than it used to be in some of these situations to make something like that happen. So, so we're pulling for you, Phoenix fans, especially our friend of the show, Josh, that you can pull something out of this. Maybe Bradley Beal will decide he's okay with being traded to a different location when it gets to the off season. I don't know. Again, another situation that we'll be keeping the pulse of as we move forward here. So, one more thing here before we get into our, I think, big at-large topic for this episode. And now we're getting into positive news. So, hey, we're shifting away from the negative here. And don't look now, guys, but Luka Dončić is still really good at basketball, and the Lakers are streaking. Some of these wins aren't the most impressive wins, but as of my last count, they're on a 7-game win streak. So they had a really embarrassing blowout loss to the Jazz. I believe that was right before the All-Star break. And then they lost to the Hornets after. And so, of course, everyone in full panic mode. I think there's some fairness in that reaction, but it was 2 games in an 82-game season, and now they're on a 7-game win streak. They've beaten the Clippers twice. They beat the Mavericks in that revenge game where you knew Luka Dončić is probably going to do everything in his power to win that. Most impressively, though, they beat the Nuggets, who are on a 9-game win streak, and they beat them pretty soundly in Denver. So with all of this and kind of trying to get acclimated to what this Lakers team actually looks like. Now we all know here, I mean, their weakness is rim protection. That does tend to get pretty important in the playoffs. So I'm curious where you guys are temperature-wise with the Lakers. I had them, below contender status last time we did like a pulse check on them, but I think that was before this Luka trade. So with what you're seeing right now, I mean, can this team have a fatal flaw like no rim protection and get a little bit further than you were maybe expecting when this Luka trade went down and they didn't get their center from Charlotte as they had anticipated? Justin, I'll go ahead and lead with you first.
Well, this will be good news for Adam Silver because I think the Lakers are for real. I mean, look what happened with the Mavericks last year. I mean, they made it all the way to the NBA Finals. Now, this is kind of like a crash or burn scenario, right? I can easily take a look at the standings. I can see if things don't break their way, Luka just gets cold, it's weird things happen, and depending on the matchups, the Lakers get bounced in the first round. Or I can see them going all the way to the NBA Finals. Like right now, I don't. Besides the Thunder, in which I'm not really completely sold on him until I see him in the playoffs, but at least from the regular season record, if we just give the Thunder the benefit of the doubt, the rest of the West, I mean, you take a look, the Lakers are the 2nd seed as we're recording this podcast right now. So to me, in terms of a playoff scenario, I always go with stars, right? I understand about the rim protection, but do we trust Anthony Edwards in a playoff scenario? I mean, the Rockets are unknown. No disrespect to both of you. I think you take a look at the Memphis Grizzlies. We'll have to see, John Morant being back in the spotlight. And with the Nuggets, they have a lot of questions as well, even though I do like Jokic. So, and I think Jamal Murray has been questioned throughout this season. So, to me, just to, I think, dismiss their fatal flaw of the Lakers as they have, no shot at making any noise. I just don't see that. I just think it's too close. I think it's pretty wide open and anything can happen. And with Luka and LeBron, I see that the window is open. And I think they got a decent shot. But at the same time, I'm not going to be here and be a Lakers apologist if you guys think they're overrated or get bounced pretty early in the playoffs. I'm not going to offer too much resistance. But at the same time, I'm fairly optimistic. Just taking a look at the Western Conference, a lot of these teams are not really, lighting the world on fire here. Clippers, Kings, the Timberwolves. A lot of these teams, I don't think, to me, I wouldn't put them so ahead of the Lakers in terms of some kind of massive upset.
So Justin, if I told you, before I throw it to Allan, if I told you the Lakers make it to the Western Conference Finals, does that surprise you or not surprise you?
Doesn't surprise me at all.
Gotcha.
Not with the competition. Yeah.
Allan, what are your thoughts?
I think it's interesting because I think outside of a game or two, Luka hasn't even been that good. He's not been Luka yet,
That's a great point.
which is an interesting thing. It's been LeBron. 40-year-old LeBron has been powering this team. Everything rests on him, honestly, I think, for this playoff run. And can he hold up? And that's kind of the big question that'll come up, right? At 40, can he do this in the playoffs? I didn't think they would be where they are now, but I do think it's a little bit of fool's gold. And I need to see them, play some big tough teams. I get the Denver win, but I don't know if I would count the Clippers as that because I think the Clippers are so up and down. It's not even funny. It's a Jekyll and Hyde team. If I'm thinking about this, where do I think they end up? To answer your question, Matt, if they made the Western Conference Finals, wouldn't necessarily be surprised because I think it's based on matchups. I think they match up well against certain teams, and I think, honestly, I think a healthy Sacramento, if DeMontis can come back from this hamstring injury, I think they will give them a ton of trouble. And so, just from size, and if Sacramento, of course, makes it through the play-in, a team like the Rockets, I think they could probably beat in the first round if they ended up facing them. Only it comes down to superstars and experience, and the Rockets just aren't there yet. It would be a bad matchup for the Rockets. And Justin, I know you mentioned something about last year's Dallas team. But last year's Dallas team, the part that killed OKC is something that the Lakers don't have. And that's that crazy defense and that front court. That front court plus Derek Jones, the only equivalency the Lakers have is maybe Jared Vanderbilt if he could stay on the floor. But other than that, there's just not that. I mean, it was lively in Washington, and those guys were just dominant in the games. It may not have shown up always in the box score, but they were dominating the Thunder. And I think the Thunder actually plugged a hole with that with Hardy. So I don't think I think if the Lakers meet the Thunder at any point, or the Grizzlies at any point during the first two rounds, they go out.
And I'm going to go back to something you said. I would agree that I feel the Lakers are a fool's gold team. And one of the things that you said is part of that reason is that they are still so heavily reliant on LeBron. And I am still worried, kind of with LeBron, like we've always, or it seems everyone's assumed, he's going to pass the torch to a teammate at some point. And I think that if there's any teammate that he's ever played with that he would pass the torch with, granted he kind of did it with Dwayne Wade first year in Miami, but now looking at Luka, I mean, that's the next best candidate, or maybe the best candidate ever as far as any running mate that he's ever had. Certainly seems like if he's smart, he's going to be more willing to do that with Luka when Luka is back at 100% than he was even with Anthony Davis. It just seemed like in LA, they could never really get that handoff figured out, even though JJ Redick was kind of centering the Lakers offense around Anthony Davis in the early part of the season, which is why they had some early success. And I gave JJ kudos for that. I think their coaching helps a lot, actually. I do want to kind of give JJ Redick, some small flowers right now. I think he's going to be a pretty good matchup coach with how they came into Denver and pulled off that win and the strategy that they were using in that game. So I'm going to be very interested to see if they can find some of those matchups, because you're right. It's all about how you get matched up in the playoffs as far as how far you're going to advance, obviously. I would love to see this Lakers team play against the Warriors. I think that would be fascinating, given they both have some pretty major weaknesses, but they also have those savvy veterans as well. And then I'll finish here, but I'll just say I would be shocked for this Lakers team to make the Western Conference Finals. If they end up doing it, then huge props to Luka, because I assume he's probably going to accomplish taking that metaphorical torch that I referred to earlier from LeBron James. And then in a sense, kudos to LeBron James as well for being smart and passing that torch to the most talented player on that team at this moment. No disrespect to LeBron. Again, he's 40 years old. Any other thoughts on the Lakers that you guys wanted to bring up before we move on?
Yeah, I just would add that I like your point about JJ Redick, Matt. I think he's actually doing a really strong job. And I mean, kudos to the Lakers for, they pulled him from podcast land and ex-player land, but they also surrounded him with some, I think, really good assistant coaches. I don't know if they're still head coach material, but I have always admired Scotty Brooks and Nate McMillan as coaching minds. So I think that's a plus for them, I think.
Totally agree. Huge benefit of these last 7 games and LeBron being inspired is that he's been putting in the most effort we've seen all season on the defensive end of the floor too. That does bring up a question mark of how much of that is left in the tank. We've seen, unfortunately, when the pressure has been dialed up, especially these last 3 seasons, that it's been tough for LeBron in the playoffs. And again, I don't mean that as any slide against LeBron James. I think it's kind of a natural flow of things when you are, 37 plus years old, as he has been the past 3 years in the playoffs. So let's move forward, guys. And I'm excited to get to this topic. Again, we are a basketball culture podcast. So, I mean, who better to talk about thoughts on the face of the league than us? I have a lot of thoughts on this. I know you guys do as well. So let's get into it. This happened during the All-Star break. Anthony Edwards was asked, in my opinion, an odd question. We could talk about that more later too, but about if he is the face of the league, wants to be the face of the league someday. Again, I think that's a weird question. His response is also very interesting in that he said he didn't want that. He kind of said, isn't that what we have Wemby for? And I'm paraphrasing here, but there was like a deflection there. I think there's other ways he maybe could have answered that. We can talk about that. Everyone has really, really been on board with Anthony Edwards in terms of his competitive spirit. We talked about kind of the somewhat premature comparisons to maybe like a Kobe Bryant, a LeBron, or a Michael Jordan in that competitive kind of spirit. There's a lot of thoughts around that, but I want to focus on what was said about the face of the league. So maybe let's first react to this whole Anthony Edwards situation, and then let's expand on face of the league in the NBA. How is that decided, and what is the implication of that? So, Allan, I'm going to lead off with you. Give me your thoughts, just as isolated as you can, and we'll continue to expand. But let's start with Anthony Edwards. Your thoughts on this interview. I'm sure you probably saw it.
Yeah, and the thing was, he took some flack for it. And part of it, I think, is just maybe Anthony Edwards just wants to have a horse ranch with Nikola Jokic and just disappear off the thing. He's not interested in all the flash. For a guy who has his talent and has his profile, he surprisingly is not all over like commercials and stuff. He's not really tapped into a lot of that. He's done a few here and there, which to me kind of points to a guy who's maybe not interested in that aspect of it.
Been in a movie.
Which movie was that? Did I miss it?
Hustle.
Hustle.
with Adam Sandler.
Okay. So,
But
he's
you're
done
correct
some things,
in terms of
right?
marketing commercials. Yeah, I've no disagreement.
Yeah. So he may just be a guy who's really wants to focus on just playing the game and being the best he can, or just, you know, paying a lot of fines. I'm not sure, where we go with him, but I don't think his answer was necessarily wrong. I thought it was weird to say Wemby's the face of the league. That reeked a little bit of maybe a little bit of jealousy, particularly because Wemby has been getting some commercials, particularly like some NBA commercials, like the Amazon stuff, the NBA on Amazon kind of stuff. So I think there's some maybe that's factored into it too. But to me, and we'll get into this a little bit later. I think it's just a weird question to ask somebody.
Agreed. Yeah, that you bring up. I hadn't thought about the element of projection there, perhaps in him bringing up Wemby, and there's plenty of these little like zingers and throwing shade at other players like this that happens in the NBA. So that's a very interesting element of this, Allan. I'm glad you brought that up. Justin, your thoughts just again on this Anthony Edwards situation, his response, etc., and then we'll continue to expand here.
Yeah, I think he has some inner conflict. Now, I'm no therapist, but you hear on one end, hey, I want to be the biggest trash talker, I'm super competitive. And then on the other end, I take a look at, Court of Gold, in which we interviewed a director. Small plug, interview will be coming out soon. So check that out. But in that documentary on Netflix, Steve Kerr goes up to him and he says he highlights all these things that the coach of the Timberwolves says that he needs to improve upon. And kind of with Anthony Edwards, he kind of doesn't dismiss Steve Kerr, but he knows. But it's kind of like, and I know we're going to get to this later on, but I think for a face of the league player, that conversation would have taken place. That was different metrics. That potential that Steve Kerr sees in Anthony Edwards would be already A, handled, or B, be worked on consistently. And I just don't think he really has the heart for it. I think we saw that last year with that pressure that was tailor-made for the Timberwolves for that stage, for him to take that mantle, and he crumbled under that pressure. That's just what happened. Now, there are multiple, I would say, opportunities for him for redemption. We've seen that all the time with different players. How many times did Jordan struggle? How many times did this player or that player struggle? It happens all the time. But I think with Anthony Edwards at this point, there's a little bit of like inner turmoil I see with him in terms of what does he want? I think, look, it's All-Star Weekend in terms of the question. It's like Super Bowl press week, right? You get guys dressed in like a trash can, or people they're not media members. They ask stupid, goofy questions. I mean, that's just what, I don't know. It's stupid. It's a dumb week for media. But I think at the same time, in terms of this face of the league discussion, and I think him talking about Wemby, I think it was a way of just like, hey, I don't want this. Give it to the French guy. Like, I'm not interested in being, the face of the league. I want to, even with him not wanting to dunk in games and all that, it's just, I don't see him wanting all this pressure and attention at this point in his career. Maybe that will change as he gets older, but I think right now, I think he doesn't want it.
Allan, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you guys remember when he was drafted and there were questions about whether he even liked basketball?
Good point. Excellent point. Excellent point. It's true.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think, that's one of the things on requirements to become face of the league is you kind of have to like the sport of basketball, I think. So fair questions. Justin, I wanted to respond to some of that and say, every face of the league has kind of their hero's journey, I think. So in my opinion, the answer to this odd question that was asked to him was more concerning to me than his struggles in the playoffs, because he's going to have more of these chances in the playoffs, and he's young, of course. Jordan, it was like 7 years in the making before he really kind of fully stepped up onto the throne, so to speak, onto that pedestal. But the mentality to just kind of deflect it. I mean, here's what I'll say real quick. And, I think in terms of looking at PR, again, this is a young guy. But you get asked that question. I mean, what's wrong with saying it would be an honor to be the face of the league, but that's really not up to me other than the work that I need to put in and achieve? I know that's a boring answer, but it's also like a super odd question. The way he answered it was saying no when, to put it bluntly, I mean, he's kind of like, in NBA terms, sort of the American hope as the face of the league of the youngsters. Now there'll be others that maybe can have that opportunity, but that's really what made it sort of red flag to me hearing those comments. Justin, go for it.
Yeah, but I will say I credit him for being honest. And I think in this day and age, the last few years where a lot of the athletes have canned answers, and it's just they're very mechanical. I credit for him to at least us telling his truth. Might disagree with it, I may not like it, it may raise some red flags, but at least he's not BSing what's going on. So I give credit for that. So I disagree in terms of having like a politically correct answer, because all the times, how many times we have to say to these athletes, be real, give us what we want, be truthful, let's show us your authentic selves. And we bash them when they actually give an honest answer. So, I mean, we could have our reactions to, hey, look, I mean, this guy may not want to be the face of the league, but at the same time, I don't criticize his response to it.
Yeah, I don't know, but is it like when keeping it real goes wrong situation in terms of the PR side of this? I mean, you are correct that people want authentic answers and all these things. It's just kind of a bummer if that is the authentic answer, in my opinion. Others that I've seen comment on this certainly disagree with where I stand on this, and that's totally fine. Let me ask this, because another aspect of this, and you guys can come back and touch on any element of this, but there's been this whole attitude, I think everyone who's been paying attention to basketball the last 15 years, 20 years has seen kind of the advent of social media get mixed into all of this. Look, face of the leagues have been criticized throughout history, but there's never been more access to criticism than there is right now on social media. If you want to find that, you can find that. And there's plenty of people who say that these players are like checking their mentions during halftime and things like that, which I think is a terrible idea. But again, these are youngsters. These are 20-year-olds in many cases, and it's a little bit different. And this is what this generation was raised with, of course. What our generation kind of started to get introduced with, they've had since before they were in the crib. So I guess do you see it as this ginormous burden to be face of the league?
Go ahead, Allan.
Yeah,
maybe a better way to ask is, like, is it worth aspiring to? And I don't think you earn it. I think we all agree you don't earn face of the league by being asked a question by a reporter or like claiming that you're the face of the league. It's obviously the work that goes into it and the way people respond and react to it, which a lot of it you can't control. Like, as we've seen, Jokic's dominance, but he's not really this like cultural icon the way a face of the league in the NBA is. So anyway, I digress. Go ahead, Allan.
Yeah, I think very few players actually aspire for something like face of the league. I think most of them aspire for big paydays and championships. I think LeBron probably aspired for it, right? I think the guy before him who aspired for it, and I don't think ever quite got it, and this might be a controversial take, but I think Kobe wanted to be the face of the league so bad after Jordan. And I don't think he actually got it until probably his last few years when he was the older, more mature, and his post-retirement almost. It was more where he finally started getting that respect. Because while he played, he did not get that. He was a face of the league, but he was not the face of the league. And I think most players probably don't want that noise. I think basketball is such a, here's the funny thing about basketball is that it's such a lonely sport. And what I mean by that is it's a team sport, but the work that you do to prepare for it, the work that you do in the weight room, shooting jumpers all by yourself for hours, or just with somebody who's not talking, and rebounding for you or whatever, it's a lonely sport. And I think it caters to people who are probably like that a little bit more. I think the players who are more flashy and more extroverted probably don't I don't know, don't end up as great as they could have been if they were more focused and introverted, which I realize I'm kind of going in a circle a little bit here, but I don't think face of the league is something most players aspire to. I think most of them want to be left alone.
Yeah, no, good points, and I think it has kind of shifted a little bit over time, especially with the business acumen and kind of just the massive teams and branding around players now. In a weird way, it may kind of inhibit some of the full face of the league type of things, because I think there's so much focus, and this isn't a criticism, this is just the way the times are, of like, this is my brand, this is me, I'm building this up, doesn't necessarily always coincide with like being this great company guy for the league in one sense, or, I mean, they're there to do a job, they're paid well to do it, and, if they acquire a lot of success along the way, that's kind of one of those requirements we've seen that you need to have to be a face of the league. Because I think you're right. I think there was Jordan, obviously, like, not to go too far back in time, but Jordan timeline, I think Kobe was in line for it. There's kind of like a Shaq moment for a little while there, that first Lakers three-peat in the early 2000s. Kobe was set up for it. We know what happened with the controversy, and I think that's when the media really shifted against him and made it kind of impossible, because I think his achievements on the court after Shaq left at a certain point were enough to do it. And I think he kind of had, if you look at what players have said over the years, I think he had kind of a face of the league phase and respect among them, but it certainly wasn't among the mass media. And you kind of have to have this confluence of all these factors to fully have that. But it shifted over to LeBron really, really quickly after the Colorado stuff happened. And once LeBron's feet were set, I mean, I think LeBron was already there, building that status, very close to it, when he took the Cavaliers to the finals against the Spurs, and that was very young in his career. And then anyway, you have LeBron has his villain moment, but he's still very much face of the league, and I think that's part of the reason people had their hearts broken by it. Then you kind of have this hybrid of LeBron and Steph Curry in that rivalry being sort of dual face of the leagues. I don't know if Steph ever fully elevates to where LeBron was, but I think he's in the mix just in terms of influence. And now we have, really, with LeBron on his way out, there's almost like an abdicating of this, again, throne, so to speak.
Yeah, I just want to interject real quick. Sorry,
Please.
For LeBron, I think the place where he really, really, it all came together for him was when he went back to Cleveland and won the championship. Then it became even bigger than face of the league. It became almost Messiah-like, and that's carried on a little bit, and it's grown a little bit now that he's breaking these crazy records like 50,000 points. So I think, I agree with your timeline there, and it's a weird space to be, but I think that hero's journey that Justin was talking about definitely is LeBron's career in a nutshell.
And it's interesting too, because I think we've got two players that, like, if you're looking at sort of this view of like the right way to do things that a lot of traditional NBA fans would sign off on. So like, for example, not forming super teams, those kinds of things that get talked about in LeBron's legacy and other players, certainly Durant. The two players doing that right now that are still sort of on that path are Jokic and Giannis. And yet, these are international players, haven't really gotten to that point of being, they've had incredible dominance on the court at certain points. Unfortunately, Giannis has had some injury setbacks, but if he were to win another title or two in Milwaukee, his list of accomplishments is amazing. Same thing for Jokic in Denver. He may go down as one of the biggest big men to ever do it. Actually, I don't think that's a stretch at this point. He's certainly, I think, the greatest offensive big man to do it, or at least knocking on the door of that title. And yet, as we've talked about on this show, they haven't really gained that traction from mass media. And I'm wondering, you guys, do you think it's possible, like, with how the sport is evolving, like in the next decade, could a face of the league be an international player, like a non-American born player?
Well, I think a couple of things for me to respond to. So first, I think I kind of disagree with the LeBron thing. I think LeBron was anointed chosen one in high school. There's no other athlete, at least in America, that got the most amount of media attention of a team sport than LeBron James. Now, internationally, I will go with one of our former guests, Jan Oyana. He profiled Wemby. He said that Wemby got a lot more media attention internationally when Wemby was younger. So, I don't live in France, so I will go off of what he said based on Europe and internationally. But in America, for sure, I remember that time back when I was in high school. And LeBron, he was the most high-profile athlete in America, and he hadn't graduated high school yet. The Humber controversy, the cover of Sports Illustrated, that first game against the Sacramento Kings, that was unprecedented media attention. And so I think in some ways you guys make a good point in terms of the Kobe and that Kobe's trial. But at the same time, I think LeBron's ascension was already pretty much destined from the media when he was already in high school. And I think it's a two-part equation. There's the media hype that is given to a Cooper Flag, that's given to Zion Williamson, that's given to Wemby. And then there's the athlete part. So for LeBron, it was a perfect mesh, right? You had the media that spotlighted LeBron, a lot of either haters like Skip Bayless or other media members that praised LeBron, and LeBron was able to not only live up to the hype, but exceed it. And then you have something like a Zion Williamson. Tons of hype since high school, tons of hype in Duke. He gets hurt. The pandemic happens. We have this whole thing about his weight, and he has not lived up to, I think, if he lives up to the hype, I think he's probably the face of the league if things go his way. And, we can talk about Zion another time just in terms of his accountability as a player. But I think it's a two-way equation. Like, a player just can't say, I'm going to be the face of the league. I mean, that's not how it works.
For sure.
You have to earn that. And I think with a lot of these players now, I don't think they have been really given that much media attention. Now, what makes Wemby an outlier in this situation is that I think he garnered a lot of hype for an international player, and he has lived up to it. And I think he has a kind of quirky and unique personality. I don't know if you saw the viral video of him playing chess in Central Park, but he had chess pieces in a bag, and he went and played chess with people just in the park, and it was raining. It was before the game against the Knicks. So he has a very, I think, approachable personality. I forgot the question you asked, Matt, but I think you're talking about international player if it's possible for them to be the face of the league. Is that correct? So I would say with Wemby, before Wemby, I would say no. But I think with Wemby and his ability on the court and that meshing of his international hype and the backing of Nike, I would say yes. And also, we have to speak to it. I know Stephen A., he caught a lot of heat for this, but I think it is a factor. Wemby speaks really good English. And I think that really, he's able to translate his personality to your common fans. And I think the media, and it's weird because I don't think the media really lashed itself to Giannis as it did to Wemby. And I think that's why you see a little bit of the disconnect there, even though I think Giannis has a phenomenal personality and he's one of the most honest players in the NBA. You listen to his press conferences. He's he's one of the few players that are pretty entertaining to listen to on I think a daily basis. But I think the media attention for Giannis was a little bit lacking there in terms of his momentum. In terms of that pressure for him being the face of the league, compared to Wemby, where there's people that were casual basketball fans. I mean, his Q rating was pretty high before he got drafted. So I think with Wemby, yes. But I think with other international players that don't have that hype, I think it's really difficult. And I think for Steph Curry, I think he struggled that too. He had a great tournament in Davidson, but at the same time, there's questions about his ankles. And just is this guy going to be reliable and he able to overcome it and become the greatest shooter ever lived? So, I think it matters in terms of having that beginner hype when they're in high school or playing internationally when they're really young, combined with that athlete, living up to those expectations.
And I'm glad you bring up Wemby because that's really the biggest bummer about this injury news that we started with at the beginning of the show, is that we would have gotten Wemby's first run in the playoffs, presumably this year. Maybe it would have just been the play-in tournament, but it would have been some postseason action, thankfully. And we're getting that taken away. And then also, is this the beginning of like a tragic tale rather than this potential face of the league sort of blooming?
Sure.
I'm still at this stage with Wemby. I'll just say candidly, I believe in him as a player if he can keep his health, of course. I think the public is still in this phase, and it's natural, where they're watching kind of because it's sort of like this circus act sort of thing. Like let's see what this player can do. Oh my goodness, this looks so novel and unique. But again, you plug something like that into success, championships, conference finals, and beyond, and that is a pathway right there to, I think, some potential face of the league if an international player is going to be able to do it. Allan, I want to get your thoughts on the international component of this as well. What do you think? Is the NBA ready for an international face?
I think they are. But I actually don't think it's going to be Wemby. I actually think the guy in LA is going to be the face of the league.
Yeah.
For international players.
Still very young.
I think the NBA focuses on scoring, and guards and small forwards. That Wemby is a defensive juggernaut, but I mean, you can go through big-time defensive players throughout the league history who should have been a face of the league and were second to, Russell to Wilt. Wilt was more popular with fans. Hakeem Olajuwon never really got his flowers while he was playing. I think it's hard I think defense can be kind of boring. And it also doesn't end up on SportsCenter a lot. So I think it's Luka.
But does Luka have the personality, though? But I mean, you just listen to him talk, and just like that charisma factor, I just don't think it's there. And to me, I just think he needs to be so good that his personality is irrelevant. And I think that hurt Tim Duncan, who was phenomenal, but people said his personality was bland. And people really, I think, weaponized that for his game, which I found really entertaining. But people just said, well, Tim Duncan's boring. He's boring. Even though I don't think they're really appreciating his greatness at the time. So I just wonder for Luka, I don't know. I think he has to be such a offensive juggernaut to overcome people just panning his personality. I mean, look at even like Tiger Woods. I mean, Tiger Woods was very revolutionary as a golfer, but people panned his personality. I mean, how many times did Jim Rome call him a robot? A bunch. So I just think with Luka, I wonder. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, I don't care what the guy's personality is. I just want to see him play. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like high school popularity contest. It's just kind of like, who dresses the best, who has the most swagger. It's just kind of all these ridiculous things that I think don't actually matter. But I think to your casual fan base, it does, unfortunately. And I think that's what it might be the disconnect unless Luka just has a massive dynasty. I mean, and as a plus, playing for the Lakers, that is an egg in his basket. But he's going to have to win a couple of titles there. I mean, if he's there and he's the scoring champion, but they're losing, I don't know if he's going to really translate to your casual fan.
I think we have to kind of, you can look back, and hindsight is 2020, obviously, in history. Like, I think LeBron had an accelerated start. I think the media was motivated to plug him for his talent, for one thing, but then also, again, kind of behind the scenes, maybe, Kobe can't be our face of the league. Let's
Fair.
put more effort into LeBron being the face of the league in terms of the media apparatus in general. And some of that is natural too. Like, given that whole situation and what went down, it's a bad look. And at the time, I remember, the opinion on Kobe totally shifted. So anyway, my point being, LeBron is kind of a rare case where I think he got to face of the league status or very close to it before even winning a title. I think in most cases, we can't really judge if someone is on that track until we see the response to their championship. Again, there's probably examples where you can argue against that. There's a huge media apparatus around Michael Jordan too, by the way. There was very incentivized to make him as popular as he was. And my last point I want to end on and kind of bounce off you guys before we get out of here. I think another thing that factors into this conversation is that Kobe, I'll put him in this, and Michael Jordan, and to an extent LeBron James, but specifically Kobe and MJ set this really, really high bar in terms of success on the court that I almost wonder if that pulls against the ascension of these new faces of the league. Now, again, I would put more blame on maybe the media not being focused enough on building these guys up and not just shooting down failures that occur for any player. But I do think when you look at like 6 titles, and that's happened, many people still alive, of course, that saw MJ win those 6, us 3 among those people. Kobe winning 5, very impressive as well, even if you discount those first 3 being with Shaq. Very, very high bar that he set, that there's an interesting conversation even that kind of plays against LeBron's legacy and things like that. So again, I think, I guess my question and my point that I'm getting at is all these accolades that we've seen in the past, is that sort of like a resistance against other players advancing forward and pushing the game forward?
Well, let me ask you a question. In the 90s, as like a popular athlete, who is on par with Michael Jordan in the 90s globally?
Gosh.
It's a football player? Is a football player on par with Michael Jordan?
No.
In the 90s? Mark McGuire?
I don't think anyone
Sammy
was on
Sosa?
par with
No
Michael
one.
Jordan.
No.
I don't
So
think
as a-
there's, I mean,
Just
Wayne
Michael
Gretzky
Jackson.
in
Yeah,
terms of
there you go.
greatness, but hockey, let's be real, was
Yeah.
not as big as the NBA.
Exactly right. So as the internet, so you're not only competing with Jordan as just a basketball star, but as a international entity
Yeah, that's a
in
great
terms
point.
of being one of the most popular figures on the planet. I mean, it's kind of hard to really articulate. I'm going to sound really old to a lot of like younger kids these days. Just how much of a pull Jordan had, and how much, because there was, you guys brought up a really good point, there's no social media. So I know for myself, being a younger kid, there was an air of invisibility to him compared to LeBron, where he's always vulnerable all the time. Like, it's just because of this, the way social media works. Even if you love LeBron, it's just, you see him talk, and it's just a different relatability compared to Jordan, which you only saw him on these very controlled sets, whether it's commercials, movies, or planned press conferences, where LeBron's basically one of the guys. It's just kind of, he makes him more human, but at the same time, that era of invisibility is gone for a LeBron James compared to a Michael Jordan. So I think, and I think for adults, that's what's really been kind of shocking about how people really hold Michael Jordan in high regard is the adults. Because as a kid, I get it, just being a kid, very impressionable. But the adults have that same air for him as well, and the people that compete against him. I think that's what kind of makes it hard for players now to overcome that. It's just how much of a force Jordan was. It is the 6 titles, sure, but it's all the other intangible stuff too that you have to compete with. And I think that's what's so hard for somebody like LeBron, who's almost in a different category. And I always say this, like, I think it is weaponized that he is not Jordan. And I think that's where I kind of agree with him in terms of the GOAT debate. It's not like, hey, it's an opinion of, hey, I think Jordan's better, but you're great. It's just like, Jordan's better, you suck. Like, I'm probably get on his nerves. Like, look, this guy had all this hype since high school, and not only to, like I said before, live up to it, but exceed it. And there's people just crapping on you because you're not Jordan. I think it has to really, all the effort and all the just pressure and ability to stay out of trouble, and then you have all these people just crapping on you, I think has to really wear on you. And I think these other players probably share that same sentiment. But I think at the other token, besides LeBron and besides Steph Curry, there's been no other player that's really been worthy of that title. And it's really had the gumption to have those accolades to being in that air. And that is a high bar. And that is an impossible bar. And Kobe came close in some respects, in some ways. But really, in this era, like, people wanted to annoy Kawhi Leonard. Get him out of here. See you later. People wanted to annoy, just these other guys, like even within, Kobe's era of like a Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, they're not it. And I think in this era here, it's going to take a while. Can Jokic, as much as we love him, much as we love Jokic, like, in terms of being in that super elite class, that is a elite conversation, and a conversation to take very, very seriously. He needs to win multiple titles. That doesn't mean he's some scrub player. It doesn't mean, like you said, Matt, that he's probably not going to be the greatest big man who ever lived. But I think that pressure of the ghost of Michael Jordan, it's not just the 6 titles. It's not just him, the accolades that he had. It's just him as just a force, as an entity, to pull the NBA from not really obscurity, but from a international league, and that goes for the other players with the Dream Team, but he was the face of that team. That's just really hard to compete, and that's almost an impossible bar for a lot of these players. And I just think they just got to go out and just play. I don't think they need to worry about it. It's something that's impossible just to achieve, and it's to let people get in their heads to worry about achieving that overall marker there. I just think it's kind of a waste of time.
Another factor of all this that you just made me think of, and then Allan, I want to throw to you for closing thoughts because we got to get out of here. But when Jordan left, he left, and there was like a vacuum, and there were room for other players to develop. Like, LeBron is still playing, and still very much, like I keep mentioning, I mean, he's the marketing materials for NBA League Pass. He's the cover athlete there. I mean, and this is not to blame LeBron. You have incredible longevity and everything, and you want to play basketball. You have every right to do it as long as a team is willing to pay you to play basketball, sure. But it does have to be mentioned as a factor that maybe because he is great and he has so many eyes on it, it's not allowing other players to blossom. And yeah, that's maybe a limited media effort there. A number of factors go into why other stars aren't coming up, maybe to that degree. Because I would argue, Justin, I mean, having 3 MVPs is a pretty good thing to like rev up, like a face of the league type status. But we haven't seen it happen, and we've talked about that ad nauseum. Allan, I want to throw to you for closing thoughts on any of this discussion, and then we'll wrap and get out of here. I know you got to get to dinner.
Yeah.
And I got
no worries.
Right.
Yeah, the thing that is interesting is, and it's Justin, you kind of brought up the Michael Jordan stuff, right? And I think in the 90s, it was the 2 Michaels were probably the biggest superstars, right? Jordan and Jackson. And nowadays, I think it's Taylor Swift. So I don't think there's anybody in sports, but I think in any sport, the closest that we're seeing to that is probably somebody who plays soccer, because that's the true global sport. And so I don't know that anybody's going to achieve what Michael Jordan achieved and what LeBron is up there too. I don't know that we're heading that way. And I think for the championships that we were talking about, I there's so much parity in the league now. I don't see Wemby winning like 10 in a row or anything like that. It's just I just don't see it. So I think we're headed for a face of the league that is the league itself and maybe multiple players. And whether that's good or bad is not for me to debate tonight, but I think that's probably where we're headed.
That's basically a return to the 1970s. Yeah.
I think that's kind of been the case since Jordan left. I mean, how many people hold Allen Iverson in such high regard? The media hated Allen Iverson, but if you talk to a lot of players in this era, how many hold more Allen Iverson than Michael Jordan? He's an icon. So I think you're right on the money, Allen. We're probably going to see multiple players, just depending on where, kids are growing up, in this day and age, who they resonate with. So,
yeah. And Justin, I think you brought up a great point. I mean, we live in essentially the age of distraction. So it seems like you tie that into what you just said, Allan. I mean, that would make sense that, you just tune into the league and you kind of pick that player that you want to root for. That's what we've been in for a long time now. We're just seeing sort of this passing of the baton from, a way of consuming media to another in many aspects. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for the conversation. Listeners, viewers, thank you so much for sticking with us. Let us know your thoughts on this Face of the League conversation. Is this conversation in general just way overblown? I do think it's very interesting and a thing that you can relate to culture, to look at like how that's mirroring in the NBA. And how that is expressed there. I think there's plenty of tie-ins to the mainstream and what's popular right now. So for Justin Goodrum, for Allan Munzler, I'm Matt Thomas. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you again very soon on In the Lab with Hoopsology. Peace out.